Okay guys, here's how you could do number 3, both by hand and using the calculator. And you're going to have access to the calculator when you do the test, and if you're working on Math Excel, you can search for statistical calculators or standard deviation calculators to do this work. So here's our original data, the 10 scores. I've rearranged them across the top here from smallest to largest. That helps me make the frequency table. So you can see that there is one number from 0 to 2. There are 4 numbers from 6 to 8. Notice that 4 right here, that counts the 6s and the 7s, because an 8 would go in the next group. So the 8s and 9s would be the next group. There's 4 of those, and there's 1, 10 to 12. So remember, a frequency is a count. When you make your graph, you have to label your axis, frequency, and in this case, points. And then you show the same intervals on the x-axis and the scale on the y-axis so that it's going up by 1s here and 2s here. And then you make the bars. So a bar of height 1 over the interval 0 up to 2. A bar of height 4 over the interval from 6 up to 8, and so on. So then the big thing is when you're asked to describe the distribution, you should describe the shape as either symmetric, skewed right, or skewed left. If it's skewed right, the tail is going to the right. So this one overall, I just said, is kind of symmetric. There's not always going to be a clear-cut answer to this. So do your best to make your best decision there. I also said there's one potential outlier. So that takes care of the S for shape and the O for outlier. The outlier is this low score of 0. It's a potential outlier. We'll talk about in a little bit how to determine if it is. Then to find the mean, I add all the values together. So 70 is what I get when I add all of these. And I divide by how many there are, which is 10. And that gives me 7 points. Make sure you include units for that. The mean is 7 points. The median is another measure of center, what's typical. And if you look at my ordered list here, you can see that I drew this line through the middle of the data. So I have a lower half and an upper half. There's 5 numbers below that line and 5 numbers above. So the median's right in the middle. Well, there is no middle, so what I have to do is average the 2 middle numbers. 7 and 8 divided by 2 is 7.5. So that's the median in this case. For the standard deviation, I have to find all the deviations from the mean and square them. So for instance, if I look at this 0, I take 0 minus 7. That tells me it's 7 below the mean. That's where the negative 7 comes from. And then I square it, and then I add it to the next deviation squared. So this is 6, this negative 1 here is 6 minus 7, which is negative 1 squared. The zeros are the 7s. They have a deviation of 0 from 7. And then the 8s, and then the 9, and then the 10. So you square all of those, add them together, you get 66, and you divide by n minus 1, which is 10 minus 1, or 9. And then you square root. So the standard deviation is about 2.71 points. That describes the average or typical spread of the data. The IQR is Q3 minus Q1. So how I did that is I looked at the lower half of the data, the lower 5 numbers, and I found the median of the lower half. The middle number is the 7 that's circled. Q3 is the median of the upper half. That's why the 8 is circled. And then the IQR is 8 minus 7, Q3 minus Q1, which is 1 point. By the way, that tells us that the middle 50% of the students' scores are within 1 point of each other. And you can see that right here. The middle 50% of the class would be, the middle 5. Well, they technically aren't here, but we can kind of see this is the middle half of the class, is actually a little more than half. They're spread out by 1 point. So that's what the IQR tells us. It's a measure of how spread out the data is. You can imagine if that were 2, the scores would be a lot different from each other. There would be more 6s, more 5s, more 9s. They would be less bunched together around that 7 and 8 like they are. So when we finish our describing the distribution, the shape, symmetric, outliers, potential of 0, or the potential outlier of 0. And then the C is center, and this S is spread. I'm going to use the median and the IQR to describe center and spread, only because I use the median and the IQR for number 2 because the data was skewed and there's potentially an outlier. And this one has potentially an outlier. And if there's an outlier, the mean and the standard deviation are greatly affected by that outlier. You can see how much bigger the standard deviation is than the IQR. Okay? And the mean is a little lower than the median because of that low outlier. So in this case, the best choice for median or for center and spread are median and IQR. If the data were symmetric with no outliers, then you should use the mean and the standard deviation in your description of center and spread. Now I just want to show you real quick how to do all of that work on your calculator. It looks a little different on yours, but what you're going to do is push the data key on the yellow calculators. And you're going to enter in the data into the list. So you can see here in list 1, I have class 1. There are 9 numbers there. And in list 2, I have class 2's data. You should do the same thing. Put list 1, put the class 1 data, and list 2, put the class 2 data. And then you could do this for either one. So I'm just going to do this for class 2, so I'm only going to work with L2. What you need to do on your calculators after you enter the data is push the second key, the green one, and then data. You'll see above there it says stat in green. And you'll get a choice that looks like this, where at the top it says 1 var stats and 2 var stats. We want to select 1 var stats. And then you have to select which list you want to use. So if you're wanting to do this data for class 2, you're going to have to arrow over and highlight L2. If you want list 1 for class 1, you hit enter and highlight L1. Leave the frequency as 1, and then go down and hit enter on calculate. And you can see this tells you your mean, your standard deviation, and if you scroll down, the n equals 10 tells you how many pieces of data there are. And if you scroll down, so your calculator should have an x bar and an SX for mean and standard deviation, you should be able to see what's called the 5-number summary. The min, Q1, median, Q3, and max. So there's your median, there's your Q3 and Q1, so you could subtract those to get the interquartile range. Max and min are just the biggest and smallest values.